We are back. Excessive celebration. Crossover radio. Radio with a purpose. Billy Bell. Scott Owens.
Okay.
Lance and Dash.
Yes. Although, for a second there, when I was bouncing back and forth, I wasn't sure which one of the old men from the Muppet Show up in the top of
On the balcony?
theater
Yeah.
I was.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you would have got whiplash.
Whipdash.
You got whipdashed?
We're back. We're going to talk a little bit about an article from somebody that I think most of the local people here are familiar with. If you're not from here and if you want to read an exceptional writer, Berry Tramel has been writing in this part of the world for a long, long time. He's very well thought of. He's a very intelligent guy. He also still has the ability to compel people to respond. Some people like him, some people don't. Bill, my favorite article well, there's two. One that I will bring in sometime where he nails the strengths and the weaknesses of every Oklahoma State and Oklahoma fan and really defines the psyche of both in a way where when he's done, both sides feel like somebody just came by and took all their clothes off and threw them out in the middle of the street and they have to actually own up to who they are. But he wrote an article when John Blake, Bill, was at the helm of the Oklahoma football team and basically wrote the article as if he was managing a Taco Bell and couldn't be trusted to make that work. And ever since then, let's just say I've had a little soft spot for Berry from that. But he wrote, Bill, what's been making the rounds since this weekend, the top 150 Oklahoma Sooners of all time. And I had the entire list. I've probably got about a third of those on here that I'd at least like to touch on in order. And then, I happen to be of an age where almost everyone on here from about the early 70s on, I have some memory. And I don't have a memory about anything from this afternoon, but some of this, Bill.
You and me both.
But the top 10, and Bill, we'll go through this pretty quick. I have no real issue with Baker Mayfield being number one. I think the criteria is based on three-time All-American, what he brought to the program, the notoriety. I don't have any issue with that.
So outside and going forward, what was the criteria for the list? Just the best ever?
It was really, there's a whole other article about what that was. Okay. and how two or three of them got together to take a look at this. But frankly, if Berry Tramel puts the list down and says, I didn't have any help doing it, this is what I think most of us should go, well, you know best, because I think he does. Right. And I think he's looking at all things. But this is really what you produced on the field of play.
Okay.
Leroy Selman, number two. I think there's a lot of people my age or close to my age that may have found fault with him not being number one. It's an argument that could be made either way. I really don't have an issue there. Number three, I take exception to Billy Sims. And he won a Heisman. Trammell said, well, he should have won another. Well, a lot of people should have won another.
Right.
He's quite the great talent. I just don't know that I would have him ahead of some of the other people on that list. But again, let's defer to Berry Tramel. Number four is Roy Williams, Bill. Hard to argue that he's not at least a top 10 player, I would say.
And I'm going to have to go in and read the article because what are we taking? It's just like, if I'm going by best player, I guess I could throw Roy up there. I can think of probably a couple of other players that I would probably consider a little bit better than Roy.
You're going to find tons of them on this list.
I also have a tough deal about separating pro career and college career, right? So in my mind, it's always tough to separate both.
Well, if you're talking about what they did at OU, then it makes absolutely no difference.
Right. So, I mean, is Kalmus on this list anywhere?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
How far down would Kalmus?
I'll get to it. He's in the 30s, as a matter of fact.
In the 30s?
Yeah. So Billy Vessels is number 5, and Vessels was maybe the best player that Bud Wilkinson coached, a two-way player, first Heisman winner ever at Oklahoma. Barry Switzer's favorite player comes in at number 6, Tony Casillas. Um, it's amazing how much respect he has for that guy, and I'm not going to argue that point. Jerry Tubbs, another guy from way back. I'm not going to dispute what happened in the 50s. Almost won the Heisman as a linebacker and as a center. Tommy McDonald, probably the first electric, if you will, superstar that the University of Oklahoma had, played both offense and defense. Number 9, one of my favorite players of all time, Joe Washington,
Yeah.
running back from 72 to 75. He had some of the most unbelievable plays. Most people remember a punt return against Oklahoma State where he spun out of trouble on the far side of the field, going right to left at Owen Field, and just an unbelievable run. The 2-yard loss on a punt return against Southern Cal out in Los Angeles, Bill, which was a game that nobody saw because Oklahoma was on probation. What? And so nobody saw that game. It ended in a 7-7 tie. Was a great play. But Joe Washington, I actually had a chance to speak with Joe one time in a phone interview, Bill, and this is an amazing thing. You know, one of the things that made him so unique was his ability to move left and right, his lateral movement. We hadn't seen anything like that other than Gale Sayers, Johnny Rogers, and then Barry Sanders later on. Nobody quite had that like those gentlemen did. And I asked him how he arrived at that. Was he born with it? How did that happen? And again, I'm a dedicated, love Oklahoma State University, but 2 of my 3 favorite football players of all time are OU football players. He happens to be one of them. And he told me that in his house, there was a hallway, Bill, and there were 3 bedrooms on 2 doors on each side and 1 on the other, and he would get at one end of the hallway and run full speed and then step into those bedrooms and back out and try to do it without cracking his shoulder or his face against the door jamb or the door when it was opened. And that's what he did in the wintertime, and when he wasn't able to be outside, he ran the hallways bouncing in and out. That's fascinating.
Now, at least once or maybe twice he either hit somebody coming out of the room, or he hit the wall and there's probably a good dent or hole in the wall.
And someday I'll tell you a story about sticking a pair of cowboy boots into a door in my sister's bedroom at the end of the hall and with my body attached to it. So, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, Joe Washington, number 9. And then, Bill, you may not remember this, but I had mentioned this guy when we were talking OU a few weeks ago, Rod Schote. He pioneered the speed linebacker position, played at Spiro, Oklahoma. He's number 10, and then Keith Jackson, number 11.
You know what I like about this list so far is he could have gone like running backs 1 through about 8,
right,
like deep.
And hard to argue.
And very, very tough to argue. And I do love the fact that he's put some defensive players on there too. I would, arguably, I think they've had also quite a few good offensive linemen that could be up in that echelon of players that I don't think he's thrown up there. But let's keep going down the
list. They start showing up here kind of in about the 3rd dozen, if you will. So Jackson and anybody that remembers this big guy from North Little Rock, Arkansas, making an end-around play against Nebraska, just a great ball player. We'll get through the top 20 real quick. Number 12, Brian Bosworth. And I got a great story, Bill, and I'll share this with you about Bosworth. A lot of people had issues with him for a variety of reasons, and I get some of those. But if anybody has any idea that this guy wasn't bright or intelligent, then you missed the mark on him. A great story about him when he was with the Raiders. They were getting ready to play Denver. And, he had made the comments calling John Elway Mr. Ed and made a lot of fun of Elway. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks before the Denver Raiders game, these T-shirts show up and all the Denver people have them, and it says the Bozo on it, and it's pictures of Bosworth, and they just flooded the market in Denver the week and a half before the game, so much that there was a whiteout effort made with these jerseys just to get in Bosworth's face over the Bozo logo and the Bozo thing to make fun of Bosworth. Bosworth made those shirts. Bosworth owned the rights to the logo, and Bosworth took all the money that he got from the Denver fans and donated to local Oakland charities. So that's who Brian Bosworth
So
was.
essentially, what I'm hearing is we can blame Brian Bosworth for all this self-publicity that Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown and all these athletes are doing nowadays.
That's fair to say.
Okay.
That's fair to say. Greg Pruitt, number 13. Real quick story about Greg Pruitt. He had hello and goodbye on his practice jersey, and mentioned to Steve Owens when Steve Owens came to one of the practices that with that 3.4 yards per carry that Owens had, he'd have to play defense at OU then. So Mildren didn't lack for confidence, and neither did, and Billy, I've mentioned this before, my two greatest favorite college football players of all time, Barry Sanders at Oklahoma State, and number 14 here, Jack Mildren, quarterback at Oklahoma. He was the original Wishbone quarterback, and Berry Tramel says he's the most important player in Oklahoma history, and just a fantastic player. 16 was Eddie Hinton. He's from Lawton, had a nice NFL career. George Cumby comes in at 17. Josh Heupel at 18 asked the question, what if Heupel hadn't come to Norman? What might have happened that first year when Stoops came in, or the second year, and won the national championship? 19, Steve Owens, Heisman Trophy running back. Bill?
So if we took this argument a different way as far as importance, do you think Heupel would be higher on that list?
Maybe, but
Or maybe not importance, impact.
impact I think is better because importance, there's a reason Heupel came to Oklahoma, and it was because of all these other guys we just named.
Right.
So impact certainly. I think that makes it a point. Number 20, Darrell Royal. Now, some might not remember him as a pretty good OU football player. I think he had some coaching gig across the Red River for quite some time, but was quarterback of the unbeaten 49 team, and is still, Bill, after all these years, the OU leader in interceptions with 17. And then had some limited career as a coach down in Texas after that. That's the top 20, Bill. We need to take a break?
Let's take a break.
Let's do that. You're listening to Excessive Celebration here on Crossover Radio. That's radio with a purpose. Listen to us every Friday from 4:30 to 6:30 by downloading the Crossover app. When we come back, Bill will tell you how to access our entertaining selves in other ways. We'll be right back.
Get that app.